I was sitting in the clinic's waiting room, flipping through an old magazine, when my phone buzzed. It was Lucas, my daughter's fiancé. His name lit up the screen like a warning. "We're moving to Europe tomorrow, Sylvia," he said, his tone slick, confident. "Your Oceanview mansion has been sold." He paused, letting the words hang like a noose. Then came the smirk I could hear through the phone. "Bye." Just like that. For a moment, the world tilted. I watched a nurse walk past with a tray of files. The clock ticked somewhere behind me. Steady, cruel. I didn't say a word. Because when you've lived long enough, silence becomes the sharpest weapon. My name is Sylvia Whitmore, 71 years old, widow of Robert Whitmore, the man who once built the Oceanfront Bank, and built me a life of quiet dignity. I had thought my daughter Clara had inherited his warmth. I was wrong. 40 years of motherhood, gone in a single phone call. They hadn't just sold my home. They'd sold the last piece of my life with Robert. That white mansion by the sea, the place where we spent every Christmas, every birthday, every stormy night, gone. All because Clara's charming fiancé thought I was too old to notice. I could picture him now, sitting across from her at some fancy restaurant, swirling a glass of wine, saying how practical it was to sell the old woman's house. Lucas always hid cruelty under courtesy. He was a smooth liar, the kind that kissed your hand while robbing your safe. The nurse called my name, but I didn't move, because deep inside me, something shifted. Not grief, not rage, something colder, sharper. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. If Lucas had bothered to check the deed, he'd know that no one sells that mansion without my signature. And if he knew a little more about the bank, he'd realize something else. I own it. The same bank that handled the sale. The same bank that would process every document he had forged. My husband Robert used to say, "Never let them know how much power you hold until they try to take it." Well, Lucas just tried. Tonight, I'll show you what a boundary sounds like when it's backed by law, leverage, and a mother who's done apologizing. Forever. The smell of roasted coffee still lingers in my memory like a ghost that refuses to fade. 6 months before that call, life was quieter, simpler, built around the gentle rhythm of mornings shared with Robert. He would sit by the window, the sunlight spilling across his newspaper, and tap his spoon twice against his cup, always twice, before taking the first sip. I used to tease him about it, saying he treated coffee like a ceremony. He'd smile and answer, "Some rituals keep us human." That morning the sea was calm, a sheet of silver outside our window. The gulls were calling. Robert reached across the table, brushed a crumb from my sleeve, and asked if I wanted to walk by the shore later. I said yes, of course I did. But before I could pour his second cup, the spoon slipped from his hand. The sound it made when it hit the floor, small, metallic, final, was the moment my life divided into before and after. I remember the tremor in his fingers, the sudden stillness of his eyes. The cup tipped over, coffee bleeding across the tablecloth, creeping toward me like something alive. I said his name, once, then again, louder, but his head had already bowed, his breathing already gone. For one suspended second, even the sea seemed to stop moving. The doctors called it a heart attack. Quick and painless, they said. Nothing about it felt quick, and nothing about it was painless. The house felt too big after that. Every sound carried, the wind, the pipes, my own footsteps echoing down hallways that no longer answered back. I learned how grief can hum quietly through the walls, a constant note you can't turn off. I folded his shirts that afternoon. The soft cotton still held the shape of his shoulders. One by one, I placed them in the wardrobe, pressing my palm flat against each folded layer, as if that could keep him here a little longer. When I shut the door, the latch clicked, a small, sharp sound, and it felt like a lock on my heart. Later, as the sun sank behind the horizon, I found his reading glasses on the kitchen counter, the lenses smudged with his fingerprints. Next to them was a note, half-finished, in his neat handwriting. "If something happens, open the safe behind the study wall." He had written it weeks before, maybe months. I had laughed at him then, said he was dramatic. Now those words looked like foresight. I never opened that safe right away. I wasn't ready. For weeks, I'd pass by that wall, fingertips grazing the wallpaper, hearing his voice in my mind. If something happens? He always prepared for storms long before they arrived. I used to think it was caution. Now I understand it was love disguised as foresight. A man making sure his wife would never be powerless, no matter who tried to take from her. When I think of that morning now, I don't remember the sirens or the paramedics or the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. I remember his hand reaching across the table. I remember the sea outside our window, calm and endless. And I remember the last thing he said before lifting that cup, words that would return to me years later when I needed them most. "Whatever happens, Sylvia," he had said softly, "keep your dignity close. It's the only thing the world can't sell." That was the morning he never finished his coffee. It started with flowers. Clara arrived at the mansion one Sunday afternoon, her arms full of lilies, the kind Robert used to bring me. She smiled too much that day, the way people do when they're hiding something. "They reminded me of you," she said, placing the vase on the dining table. The scent was strong, almost overwhelming. Behind her stood Lucas, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, the gesture of a man who wanted everyone to know what he owned. He greeted me with that perfect smile of his, teeth polished, eyes hollow. "You shouldn't live here alone, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "It's not safe for someone your age." Someone your age. The phrase landed with quiet precision. I nodded, thanked him for his concern, and watched the way Clara's fingers intertwined with his. There was tension in that grip, control disguised as affection. Over tea, Clara spoke about the city, about her work, about how busy life had become. Lucas interrupted often, finishing her sentences as though her thoughts belonged to him. He talked about real estate, about opportunities, about how property values were peaking near the coast. "It's the perfect time to sell," he said, swirling the spoon in his cup, "before the market drops." I stirred my own tea slowly, listening. The porcelain clicked faintly each time my spoon brushed the edge. That sound was steadier than his voice. When he excused himself to take a call, Clara sighed and leaned back in her chair. "He's just trying to help, Mom," she said. "He worries about you living all the way out here." "I've lived here for 40 years, I replied. "The sea hasn't hurt me yet." She smiled, but her eyes darted toward the door where Lucas had disappeared. "He thinks we could find you a nice place closer to the city, something smaller, easier to manage." "Easier to manage," I repeated. "That's an interesting way to describe confinement." Her expression faltered, only for a second, before she reached for my hand. "I just want you to be comfortable." "Comfortable," I said, returning her smile, "isn't the same as safe." The air between us shifted, heavy with unspoken things. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the curtains. The lilies trembled in their vase. When Lucas returned, he placed his arm around Clara again, and she leaned into him out of habit. I could see the pattern forming, her dependence feeding his ambition. I had seen it before, in younger couples at the bank, when charm was just another form of leverage. After they left, I stood by the window and watched their car roll down the driveway. The sea beyond shimmered, endless and indifferent. I looked at the lilies on the table. One petal had already fallen, curling at the edge like something exhausted from pretending to bloom. I thought of Robert's words. "Keep your dignity close." Dignity, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't beg or argue. It watches, it waits. That night, I wrote in my journal, a habit I had long abandoned. Clara visits often now, always with him. Love visits more when inheritance waits. The pen felt heavier in my hand. Each word I wrote was calm, measured, but underneath the calm, something else began to stir. A quiet knowing that the warmth I once recognized in my daughter's eyes had been replaced by reflection. Not her own light, but someone else's shadow. I closed the journal, placed it on Robert's old desk, and glanced at the vase once more. The lilies had already begun to lean toward the dying light. The morning after their visit, the house felt too quiet, as if every room was holding its breath. I walked through the hallway, past the framed photographs of birthdays and holidays, each one capturing a life that no longer fit inside the present. Dust floated in the sunlight like small, aimless thoughts. The ocean beyond the windows whispered against the rocks, steady and unbothered, the same way it had been when Robert was alive. In the study, his model ship still stood on the shelf. He had built it from scratch during the first year of our marriage. Every plank, every sail, shaped with patience and precision. The name he carved into the hull was Clara's Hope. I remember laughing when he showed it to me. "She's only 3, I said. "Too young for a ship." And he'd replied, "Then she'll grow into it." Now, the sails had yellowed slightly, the ropes stiff with age. I touched the deck with my fingertips. The wood was cool, solid, real. A relic from a time when love didn't need proof. My hand lingered there longer than I meant it to. I moved from room to room, picking up small pieces of our past. The piano Robert used to play at dusk, the blanket Clara wrapped herself in during thunderstorms, the seashell lamp that glowed softly in our bedroom. Every object hummed with the echo of someone's laughter. They hadn't just sold a house. They had sold the museum of my life. In the corner of the living room, a framed photograph had slipped sideways. I straightened it. It was from our anniversary, Robert and I standing by the sea, his hand on my shoulder, my hair caught in the wind. I remembered how he'd said that the ocean never really takes anything away. It only hides it until you're ready to face it again. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could almost hear him. His voice, deep and calm, the kind that made silence feel full instead of empty. The tide rose and fell outside, as if keeping time with my breathing. "They didn't just sell my home," I whispered. "They sold my memories piece by piece." The house answered with creaking wood and distant waves. I stood in the doorway, the late afternoon light cutting through the windows, painting long golden lines across the floor. The air smelled faintly of salt and old wood, the scent of everything I had lost and everything I had yet to reclaim. Before leaving the room, I adjusted the sails on the model ship. It stood straight again, ready for wind. I left it there, facing the open window, where the sea breeze could reach it. The ship might never sail, but its presence was enough. A reminder that some things, once steadied, never truly sink. Evening settled over the house like a memory I couldn't turn off. The last light of day stretched across the walls, golden and fading, the color of endings. I sat at Robert's old desk, the same place he used to balance the ledgers for Oceanfront Bank, and opened the bottom drawer. For years I had kept his things untouched. Letters, receipts, fountain pens that no longer wrote. Beneath them, wrapped in brown paper, was a sealed envelope. It was heavier than it looked, its edges worn from time. My name was written across the front in Robert's handwriting, steady and sure. Underneath, a single line read, "Open only when you're ready." For months, maybe longer, I had ignored it. I wasn't ready then. But now, after that phone call, after Clara's visit, after realizing how easily kindness could be used as a weapon, I was ready. I tore the envelope open carefully. Inside was a small silver USB drive, its surface cool and smooth. Robert always had a way of turning sentiment into practicality. He believed love should protect, not just comfort. I placed the drive into the laptop, and the screen came alive, bathing the room in blue light. A video file appeared with a date from 3 years ago. When I clicked it, his face filled the screen. He was sitting right here, in the same chair, wearing the same gray sweater I'd kept folded in the wardrobe. His smile was soft, but deliberate, as if he had rehearsed this moment knowing it would find me one day. "If you're watching this," he said, "something must have changed." I froze. His voice was warm, familiar, threaded with the steadiness that had once built our life. "I wanted you to know, Sylvia, that every share I owned in Oceanfront Bank now belongs to you. You're the controlling shareholder. The documents are already in place. I did it quietly because I know how you value peace. But if someone ever tries to touch what's yours, they'll find out soon enough who really holds the pen." He paused and leaned closer, his tone turning gentle. "The bank isn't just money, my love. It's protection. If they touch what's yours, they touch what's mine, and through it, you'll own them." I didn't realize I was crying until the tears blurred the image on the screen. The sound of his voice felt like both an embrace and a command. The room seemed brighter suddenly, as if the light itself had understood. I looked down at the small drive, still glowing faintly, and smiled through the tears. Robert hadn't left me alone. He had left me armed, not with anger, but with knowledge. I leaned back in the chair, the sea wind whispering through the window. On the desk, the silver drive reflected a thin beam of light, a quiet torch burning against the dark. I closed the laptop and placed the USB back inside the envelope. The paper was soft now from my hands, edges bending slightly. I sealed it again with a single piece of tape and returned it to the drawer. Some secrets are meant to rest, not because they're forgotten, but because they're understood. When I turned off the lamp, the faint blue afterglow of the screen lingered on the glass for a moment before fading completely. The house returned to silence, but the silence felt different, not empty, not lonely. It felt like the pause before a storm that already knows its direction. Night had fallen quietly, wrapping the house in the kind of stillness that made every sound feel louder. I sat alone in the study, the lamp casting a pool of amber light over Robert's old desk. My fingers traced the grain of the wood, following the same lines he used to draw when he worked late. Somewhere beneath the stacks of ledgers and neatly folded receipts, I knew something was waiting, something he had left for me. I opened the drawer slowly. Inside, beneath a stack of yellowed papers, lay a sealed envelope, thick and weighty, its corners soft from years of being moved but never opened. My name was written across it in Robert's hand, bold, steady, and full of purpose. Below it, one sentence: "Open only when you're ready." I had seen that envelope every day for 6 months and always looked away. But tonight, after the phone call, after Lucas's smug voice and Clara's silence, I finally understood what ready meant. It meant there was nothing left to lose. I broke the seal. Broke. Inside was a small silver USB drive, cool and smooth in my palm. Robert had been meticulous about records, about security. The bank was his world, and through it, he had built mine. I inserted the drive into the laptop. The screen flickered, then filled with his face, sharp suit, gray sweater beneath, eyes calm as the sea. "If you're seeing this, Sylvia," he began, his voice steady, "it means life has changed." The sound of him, real, alive, made my chest tighten. He continued, his tone a careful balance of warmth and instruction. "I've transferred all controlling shares of Oceanfront Bank to your name, quietly, permanently. You are the sole owner now. I didn't tell you sooner because you would have refused. You've never needed power, but power may one day need you." I pressed my hand to my mouth. The desk blurred through tears I didn't feel falling. "The bank isn't just business," he said softly. "It's leverage. If anyone ever tries to take what's yours, remember this: they can't. Every loan, every signature, every transaction moves through you. If they touch what's yours, they touch what's mine, and you'll own them before they even know it." He leaned back, a faint smile touching his lips. "Don't let grief make you smaller, Sylvia. Let it make you precise." The video ended, freezing on that smile. The room was silent except for the distant hum of the sea. I stared at the screen until the glow dimmed and only my reflection remained. My hands were trembling, but my mind felt clear. I removed the drive and held it up to the light. Its silver surface caught the reflection of the lamp, flashing like a signal. Not a cry for help, but a beacon of readiness. I placed it back inside the envelope, folded the flap, and returned it to the drawer. The paper rustled softly, a sound almost like breath. Robert had left me the kind of gift no thief could steal: foresight. He hadn't prepared me for loneliness. He had prepared me for war. the kind fought in silence, with documents, signatures, and the quiet patience of someone who knows exactly where the power lies. When I turned off the lamp, the afterglow lingered on the screen for a heartbeat before fading. The room fell into darkness, and for the first time since his death, I didn't feel alone. I felt awake. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room like it had forgotten how to be gentle. It touched every surface, the desk, the photographs, the lines of my face in the mirror. I had not slept, but I didn't feel tired. My body was still, yet my mind moved with a new, deliberate rhythm. There was no more fog, no confusion, only a kind of sharpness that comes when grief finally hardens into understanding. I dressed carefully, not in morning black, but in a soft cream blouse and a long gray coat. I brushed my hair back, looked at myself once more, and realized that the woman in the reflection no longer looked like someone waiting for things to happen. She looked like someone preparing to make them happen. The hospital was quiet when I arrived for my appointment. The same waiting room, the same hum of air conditioning, the same stack of outdated magazines. The nurse smiled politely and asked me to fill out a few forms. My hands were steady. When she called my name, I followed her down the hall, the sound of my heels echoing on the tile. The checkup was routine: blood pressure, heart rate, a few questions about medication. The doctor was kind, middle-aged, with the cautious tone of a man who had delivered too much bad news in his life. But not today. "Your results are excellent," he said, glancing up from the file. "Your heart is in remarkable condition for someone your age. I wish I could say the same for most of my patients." I smiled faintly. "So, I'm healthy enough for trouble?" He laughed, not understanding what I meant, and handed me the summary sheet. "Healthy enough for anything." When I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun had turned the hospital windows to mirrors. For a second, I caught my reflection again, smaller this time, framed by the light. I thought of Lucas's words, his arrogance, the certainty in his voice when he said the house was sold. He had no idea how alive I was. The paper crinkled softly in my hand as I read the line at the top. Excellent cardiovascular health. I folded it neatly, slipped it into my coat pocket, and felt the USB beside it. Cold, metallic, solid. Two truths pressed against my palm, my heart still strong, and my power finally awake. I began to walk toward the parking lot, the breeze lifting the edges of my coat. Around me, life moved as usual, people leaving appointments, nurses laughing, the faint rhythm of a world that believed in normal days. But for me, there would be no more normal. There would only be the quiet unfolding of consequence. As I reached the car, a leaf landed on the windshield, spinning gently before resting flat. I brushed it away and whispered to no one in particular, "My heart's fine, but theirs won't be." The engine started with a low hum. I took one last look at the hospital building, then drove toward the coast, where the ocean waited, calm and endless, reflecting the light like glass. There was peace in that stillness, but beneath it, I could feel the tide preparing to turn. That night, I left the window open. The wind carried the faint sound of waves into the room, steady and patient. Somewhere out there, the sea was breathing, gathering its force for the storm that was coming. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to meet it head on. The morning after my appointment, I woke to the sound of gulls circling above the shoreline. The air smelled of salt and rain, the sky split between gray and gold. I made the bed, smoothed the wrinkles from the sheets, and folded the corners with the same precision Robert once admired. Everything looked neat, ordinary, and harmless. It was exactly the illusion I needed. In the kitchen, I brewed a pot of tea and poured it into a porcelain cup Robert had bought during our honeymoon. The steam curled upward, thin and silent. Across the table lay the folded medical report, proof that I was stronger than anyone assumed. I took one last look at it before tucking it into a drawer. Some truths are better hidden until they're useful. When the doorbell rang, I knew who it was even before I looked. Helen, my neighbor, stood on the porch holding a basket of muffins, her expression soft with pity. "I heard about Clara," she began gently. and that she and her fiancé are planning to move. You poor thing. You'll be all alone now. I smiled faintly, stepping aside to let her in. I've always been good company for myself. We sat in the living room. She talked about her grandchildren, about the charity drive at the church, about how quiet the neighborhood had become. I nodded, poured her tea, and pretended to listen. Every few minutes she looked at me with that blend of sympathy and curiosity that people reserve for the recently betrayed. "You must miss having someone around," Helen said finally. "I do," I replied, my tone light. "But I've learned that silence can be loyal when people aren't." She laughed softly, unsure whether it was meant as humor. "You're stronger than I could ever be." "I'm not strong," I said, watching the steam drift from my cup. "Just aware." Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment, then she nodded. "If you ever need anything, dear, just call me." "I will," I said, knowing I never would. When she left, I carried the empty cups to the sink, rinsed them, and looked out the window at the sea. The waves were rolling slowly, predictable and unbothered, the kind of calm that comes before the water decides to rise. I understood it. Calmness isn't surrender, it's camouflage. I returned to the desk and turned on the computer. The login screen of Oceanfront Bank appeared, the logo glowing faintly in the dim room. My fingers moved across the keys with familiarity. Robert had taught me the internal systems years ago in case of emergencies. "Knowledge is insurance," he used to say, "not power until you need it." I typed a brief message addressed to Donovan Pike, our family's attorney and Robert's oldest friend. It was simple, almost domestic in its tone. "Tea this week? Need to discuss estate matters." I signed it SW and sent it. Afterward, I opened the drawer where Robert's letter and the USB now rested. I didn't take them out. Not yet. I just let my fingertips brush against the paper. It was like touching a weapon still in its sheath, waiting for the right moment to draw. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. I closed the window, but left the curtains open. The storm could come if it wanted. I had weathered worse. I made another cup of tea, poured it slowly, and sat back down at the table. Across from me, the chair where Robert used to sit remained empty. I imagined him there, quiet, watchful, approving. He would have understood the mask I wore, the soft-spoken widow who looked fragile but held an empire behind her smile. I raised my cup toward that empty chair and whispered, "Let them believe I'm broken. Broken glass cuts deepest." The next afternoon, I drove into town, the rain having washed the streets clean and left the air tasting of metal and salt. The sign for Pike and Associates came into view, just as it had for more than 30 years. The brass letters were a little tarnished now, but the man behind them had not changed. Donovan Pike was still the same steady presence he had been when Robert and I first opened our accounts, the same calm voice who handled the fine print most people never bothered to read. His secretary looked up as I entered. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, surprised, her tone dipping quickly into warmth. "It's been so long. Mr. Pike will be thrilled to see you." "Thank you," I replied, taking a seat in the waiting area. The faint tick of the grandfather clock echoed against the paneled walls. Legal offices always smelled of paper, ink, and secrets. When Donovan appeared, his hair was grayer, his shoulders broader with age, but his eyes were exactly as I remembered, steady, analytical, kind in a way that never felt condescending. "Sylvia Whitmore," he said with a small smile. "It's been too long." I stood, and he clasped my hands firmly. "Robert would scold me if I let that much time pass," I said. "He'd scold both of us," Donovan replied. "Come in. You look well." His office overlooked the harbor. The afternoon sun caught the water in broken reflections that danced across the ceiling. He gestured for me to sit, then moved to the cabinet behind his desk, retrieving a thick folder already labeled with my name. I hadn't called ahead. He had kept it ready all these years. "I'm assuming this visit isn't social," he said gently. "No," I answered, "but I wish it were." He opened the file, scanning the documents inside. "Everything you and Robert built still stands. Oceanfront Bank remains under the original ownership structure you both created. You still hold the controlling shares." His words settled in the air, calm but absolute. "Do you remember telling me once," I said, "that power means nothing until someone tries to take it?" He looked up, smiling faintly. "I said that to Robert, too. He liked to repeat it whenever the board got too loud." I leaned forward slightly. "Lucas Reed, the man Clara plans to marry, has been handling the sale of my house, or so he believes. I'd like to make sure every transaction under that address is reviewed and any related accounts frozen for now." Donovan nodded, understanding instantly. "A preemptive safeguard." "Call it prudence," I said. "And a little curiosity." He turned toward his computer, typing with quiet efficiency. "You know, Robert used to tell me that you were the sharper one." "Then you know how wise he was," I replied. A small laugh escaped him. "All right. We'll issue a temporary hold on any sale or transfer related to your property. I'll also flag the buyer's bank account under compliance review. That will be Lucas's company," I said. "Oceanfront Realty." Donovan paused mid-keystroke and raised an eyebrow. "He's using Oceanfront's name?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I thought it poetic. The irony will be, too." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "You realize you still own the controlling shares of the bank, Sylvia. Legally speaking, if they used Oceanfront Bank to fund anything, you can access every document, every signature." I met his gaze. "Then silence is our best weapon." He nodded slowly. "Silence and patience. The law loves both." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a gull landed on the windowsill, shaking water from its wings. The world continued as if nothing had shifted, though both of us knew it had. I rose to leave, closing my purse with deliberate calm. "Send the paperwork to my home address, Donovan. I'll sign whatever you prepare." "You'll have it by tomorrow," he said, standing. "And Sylvia, Robert would be proud." I paused in the doorway, glancing back at him. "Robert never liked pride," I said, "but he did value precision." On the drive home, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the windshield. I didn't smile, not exactly, but there was a strange warmth in my chest, something close to purpose. For the first time since his death, I felt him beside me, not as a memory, but as momentum. I drove past the cliffs overlooking the ocean, the waves crashing against the rocks below. Each one struck with measured force, patient and inevitable, like the sound of justice rehearsing its entrance. By the end of the week, the neighborhood had begun to whisper. News travels faster than truth in quiet towns, and people love a story that lets them feel kind. To them, I was the lonely widow, the woman left behind by her daughter, abandoned in her seaside house with nothing but memories and ghosts. They didn't know I was listening, and I didn't correct them. Let them think I was fragile. The weak are always underestimated. That morning, I decided to go into town. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets clean and shining, the air bright with salt. I wore a soft gray scarf, simple pearls, and my calmest expression. At the market, Helen was already there, standing near the flower stall. She waved when she saw me, her smile warm and full of pity. "Sylvia, dear, out and about today?" she asked, holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. "Yes," I said, examining the flowers. "The house feels a bit empty. Thought I'd bring something alive into it." She nodded, her tone tender. Her tone, "You're so brave. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, especially after what happened with Clara. People talk, you know, but I always tell them you've handled it with grace." "People always talk," I said lightly. "It keeps them busy." Her eyes softened, unsure whether I was joking. "If you ever need company, my husband and I would love to have you for dinner." I smiled. "That's kind of you, Helen. I might take you up on it one day." She looked relieved, as though she'd been waiting for permission to feel good about her own compassion. We chatted a little longer about the weather, the rising cost of groceries, the church raffle next month. Every word she spoke came wrapped in sympathy, and every nod of mine was perfectly timed. As we parted, she squeezed my hand. "Stay strong, dear." "I intend to," I said. I carried the bouquet through town, nodding at the familiar faces who smiled too brightly, waved too long. Their kindness was polite theater, a show performed for their own comfort. I walked through it quietly, letting the act continue. It was safer that way. When I reached the bakery, I bought a single loaf of bread and a small jar of honey, just enough to make the image complete. The gentle old widow who still found sweetness in simple things. The cashier smiled as he handed me the change. "You doing all right, Mrs. Whitmore?" "I always am," I replied. Back home, I arranged the chrysanthemums in a crystal vase on the windowsill. Their white petals glowed against the dark waves beyond the glass. They looked like purity, but they smelled faintly of funerals. I stepped back and studied them. Perfect. Then I went to my desk and checked my email. A new message from Donovan waited. The subject line was short. Action confirmed. The text was even shorter. Hold implemented. Transactions frozen. I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection faint in the black screen. Outside, I could hear Helen's laughter drifting across the yard as she spoke to another neighbor, probably telling them how strong I was being. I smiled to myself. Let them talk. Let them think I was harmless. Because in a world that only pities, silence becomes the sharpest disguise. I turned toward the sea, its surface calm and glimmering. Every wave that broke against the rocks whispered the same thing back to me. They'll never see it coming. The following morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sky outside was the color of steel, the sea flat and pale beneath it. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the tide retreat as the first email of the day arrived on my phone. It was from Donovan. The subject line read, "Action executed." I opened it slowly. The body of the message was one simple sentence. Transfer of property temporarily suspended pending verification. Beneath it, an attachment. The official notice bearing Oceanfront Bank's watermark. My signature was printed neatly at the bottom. The power of a single line of ink had never felt heavier. Across town, in a bright glass office, chaos had begun. Donovan called later that morning. "It's done," he said. "Every transaction linked to the mansion has been frozen. The realty office received the notice an hour ago." "Good," I said. "And Lucas?" "He'll find out soon enough. They always do." After hanging up, I walked through the house, the familiar floorboards creaking under my steps. The air felt different, lighter, sharper. I opened the curtains and let the daylight flood in. For months, the mansion had felt like a cage of memories. Now it felt like headquarters. By noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. I answered and waited. "Mrs. Whitmore," a voice snapped. It was Lucas. "There seems to be an issue with the property transfer, some kind of error with the bank. The transaction's been frozen." "Has it?" I said softly. "Yes, and I need your help clearing it up. I was told you're still listed as primary signatory on the account. That must be a mistake." "Do you think so?" He hesitated, his confidence flickering. "It's just a technical glitch. I'll have them fix it." "You'll have a difficult time doing that," I said. "The documents you used, the ones with my signature, they were missing something important." "And what's that?" His tone sharpened. "My permission." There was silence on the line, the kind that hums with realization. "What are you saying?" he demanded. "I'm saying that every paper still has my name on it, Lucas. Every deed, every transfer, every account. The bank you thought you used to sell my home? I own it." I could almost hear him swallow on the other end. "That's impossible." "Then you should probably check again." He cursed quietly, the mask slipping just enough for me to glimpse the panic underneath. "You can't do this." "I already have." Before he could respond, I ended the call and set the phone down beside my cup. The tea had gone cold, but I took a sip anyway. It tasted like victory, bitter, deliberate, necessary. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The ocean was beginning to darken, the first signs of an approaching storm. I stood there for a moment, letting the air fill the room, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves. Somewhere across the city, Lucas was realizing that the house he tried to sell now belonged to no one but me, legally, irrevocably, and beyond his reach. Paperwork had become my weapon, and silence my shield. As the day faded, I sat at Robert's desk and wrote a single note in my planner, the way he used to record each milestone. Day 1, control restored. Then I closed the book, leaned back in the chair, and smiled. The first strike had landed. Not a shout, not a scene, just a document, stamped and sealed, carrying the weight of quiet justice. 2 days later, I returned to the mansion. The drive up the hill felt unfamiliar, though I had taken it 1,000 times before. The ocean shimmered below, silver and cold, as if watching me climb toward the truth that waited at the top. When I reached the gates, the padlock hung open, the chain swinging slightly in the breeze. Someone had been here. The front door stood ajar. A thin layer of dust floated in the air, disturbed by footsteps that weren't mine. I stepped inside, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The house smelled faintly of paint and perfume, someone else's idea of improvement. "Hello?" I called, though I already knew no one would answer. In the foyer, boxes were stacked neatly, labeled with words that made my stomach turn. Furniture sale, antiques appraisal, donations. My life, divided into categories by strangers. I walked deeper into the house, every step echoing the sound of ownership reclaiming its ground. A man's voice startled me from behind. "Ma'am, you're not supposed to be here." He was young, nervous, wearing a realty badge on his jacket. His clipboard trembled slightly in his hands. "And why not?" I asked calmly. "This property is being prepared for transfer. The owner's daughter and her fiancé said you've moved to a care facility." I looked at him for a long moment. "Do I look like I'm in a care facility?" He flushed, stammering. "No, ma'am, I'm just following instructions." I walked past him into the living room. The curtains were half torn down, the grand piano covered in dust sheets. On the mantel, where Robert's photo once stood, there was a faint square of cleaner paint, the ghost of what had been taken. I turned to face the agent. "Did they also tell you I was dead?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" "Because that would explain why my name is still on every legal document concerning this property, and why the bank, which I happen to own, has frozen the sale." He swallowed hard, eyes darting to the boxes. "I didn't know. They said what they needed to make theft look like compassion," I said. My voice stayed soft, but the air in the room changed, tightening around the truth. He lowered his clipboard. Should I leave?" "Yes," I said. "But before you do, take those boxes outside. They don't belong here." He hesitated, then nodded quickly and began carrying them out, one by one. The sound of cardboard scraping against the floor filled the silence like an apology. When the last box was gone, I stood alone in the living room. The walls, stripped bare, reflected the fading afternoon light. I crossed to the window, brushing a layer of dust from the glass. Beyond it, the sea moved restlessly, waves slapping against the rocks with the quiet rhythm of judgment. "They said you were sick," I whispered to the reflection staring back at me. "Maybe I am, sick of lies." The wind howled faintly through the cracks in the window frame, carrying the scent of salt and rain. It was the same wind that had blown through this house when Robert and I first moved in, the same sound that had once meant home. Now, it sounded like warning. I ran my fingers along the piano keys beneath the dust sheet. They felt cold, stiff, unplayed for too long. One note escaped as I pressed lightly, a single, imperfect sound that lingered in the empty room. I closed the lid and drew the sheet back over the piano. The act felt ceremonial, like closing the eyes of something that had witnessed too much. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of the front door still half open, the same door Lucas had promised to sell. I walked over, placed my hand against it, and slowly pushed it shut. The click of the latch echoed down the hallway, a small, final sound that felt like a heartbeat returning to its rhythm. Outside, thunder rolled far out over the water. The storm had not yet reached the shore, but I could feel it gathering. Lies had opened this door. Truth had closed it. The next time it opened, it would be on my terms. The following morning, I met Donovan at his office again. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and the sky hung low, heavy, the way it always does before a reckoning. He was already standing by his desk when I walked in, a folder open before him, pages spread out like evidence laid bare. "I think you'll want to see this," he said quietly. I took the seat across from him and waited. He slid the papers toward me. At first glance, they looked familiar. My name printed in its usual elegant font, my signature looping neatly at the bottom. Perfect. Practiced. Almost. "Lucas used these documents to authorize the transfer," Donovan explained. "The signatures are remarkably convincing, but the ink tells a different story. It's synthetic, printed, not written. Someone scanned your signature from an old form and reproduced it." I looked closer. The line of the W in Whitmore curved slightly higher than mine ever had. It was a small difference, the kind only a patient person would notice. I smiled faintly. "He always did underestimate patience," I said. Donovan watched me carefully. "I'll have our compliance team file an immediate fraud report. We'll need your verification to confirm which version is authentic." I reached into my purse and pulled out a pen, the same one Robert had given me the year we founded Oceanfront Bank. Gold trim, still heavy in my hand. I uncapped it slowly, then laid the papers side by side, the forgery and the original. "This one," I said, tapping the false page, "is what greed looks like when it tries to imitate grace." Then I signed the real document beneath it. One clean, deliberate motion. The ink gleamed wet under the light. "There," I said. "Now it's mine again." Donovan nodded, satisfaction flickering behind his calm. "That will hold up in court. And in the court of perception, which might be even stronger." He placed the authentic copy into a separate envelope and sealed it with a red stamp. The sound was soft, but decisive, the sound of a trap closing. "You know," he said, looking at me with that old lawyerly respect, "most people your age would have let this go." "Most people my age," I replied, "haven't spent 40 years reading contracts for fun." He smiled. "Touché." I stood, smoothing my coat. "Send Lucas a copy of the fraud report, not through the bank, through his lawyer. Let him feel the ground shift beneath the illusion he built." Donovan leaned back. "You're playing this well, Sylvia. Cold, but fair." "Fairness isn't cold," I said. "It's just clean." Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. I watched through the window as droplets struck the glass, tracing thin silver lines down its surface, like signatures dissolving. "I used to think ink was permanent," I said. "Now I know better." Donovan closed the folder. "You've just rewritten the ending to his story." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just reminding him who the author is." I turned to leave, my heels clicking against the polished floor, each step sounding more certain than the last. At the door, I paused and looked back. "When this is over," I said, "send him a thank you note. Tell him I learned something valuable." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "That forgery," I said, "is just flattery with consequences." I walked out into the rain, letting the cold drops sting my face as the clouds finally broke open. Somewhere across the city, Lucas was beginning to understand that he hadn't just stolen a signature. He had awakened the woman who wrote it. The rain had cleared by morning, leaving the air bright and cold, the kind of day when the sunlight feels sharper than it should. I dressed simply. A navy coat, gloves, and the same pearl earrings Robert had once called my armor. Then I drove to the Oceanfront Bank, the institution we had built brick by brick, law by law. The building stood the same as it always had, its glass facade gleaming in the light, the company's name etched across the front like a quiet monument. Inside, everything smelled of polished wood and ambition. People hurried past with coffee cups and tablets, unaware that the woman walking among them had once signed their paychecks. At the counter, a young employee looked up and smiled. Her name tag read Lucy Morales. She couldn't have been older than 25. "Good morning, ma'am," she said. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to review some details regarding a transfer connected to Oceanfront Realty," I said. "It's under the name Lucas Reed." Lucy nodded politely. "Do you have authorization, ma'am?" "I do," I said, handing her a slim folder with the Oceanfront seal, the kind only senior-level owners received. Her eyes widened slightly as she scanned the stamp. "Oh," she murmured, "please, follow me." She led me through the frosted glass corridor into a quiet conference room. The blinds filtered the sunlight into clean geometric lines across the table. Lucy opened her laptop, fingers moving quickly. "There's a flagged notice on this account," she said. "It seems the transfer was frozen by our compliance department." I took a seat, folding my gloves neatly beside me. "Yes," I said, "I'm aware. I'd just like to verify the documents myself." She nodded, pulling up the scanned contracts. On the screen, I saw the familiar curves of my forged signature, the one Lucas had used. I tilted my head slightly, studying it as though I were an art critic examining a forgery. "You have a good eye," Lucy said, noticing my focus. "Whoever did this was meticulous." "Meticulous," I repeated, a faint smile touching my lips. "That's one word for it." I leaned closer, pointing at the lower corner of the page. "Do you see this loop here on the W? It rises too high. I never make that stroke. That's how you tell the difference between confidence and imitation." Lucy looked impressed. "You know a lot about signatures." "I should," I said softly. "I married a banker." She laughed, uncertain whether it was a joke. "Would you like me to note the discrepancy?" "Yes," I said. "Mark it for fraud review. And print me 2 copies, one for the file, one for myself." As she typed, I studied her. Quick, sharp, observant. The kind of mind that noticed details most people ignored. When she returned with the papers, she hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said cautiously, "may I ask something?" "Of course." "Why are you doing this yourself? Most people would let the lawyers handle it." I looked at her steadily. "Because knowledge is my quiet gun." Her eyes widened a little, uncertain whether to laugh or take it seriously. "That's powerful." "It's practical," I said. "If you understand the system, you never have to raise your voice. You just pull the right file." She nodded slowly, as if memorizing every word. I placed the printed documents back into the folder, then stood. "You've been very helpful, Miss Morales. Keep learning. You'll need it one day." "I will," she said, smiling. "It's an honor to meet you." I paused at the doorway, watching the reflection of sunlight slide across the glass walls, a shimmer like the sea. In that moment, I saw not just a bank, but a classroom. Every file, every clause, every number on those screens was a weapon waiting for the right hand to wield it. As I stepped back into the lobby, a man held the door for me. The wind swept through, carrying the faint scent of the ocean. I clutched the folder close and smiled to myself. Lucas had tried to play with money. I had raised it into an art form. That night, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the sea outside. The moonlight stretched across the living room floor, pale and sharp as a blade. I sat at Robert's old desk, surrounded by folders, letters, and the faint smell of ink. It was the same desk where he once drafted the first charter of Oceanfront Bank, where every decision began with patience and ended with precision. My phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID was international. I didn't need to read the name to know who it was. I let it ring once, twice, before answering. "Still awake, Mrs. Whitmore?" Lucas's voice slithered through the speaker, thinner now, stripped of the charm it once carried. In the background, I could hear traffic and rain. Not the gentle kind, but the kind that beats against glass in frustration. "I rarely sleep when people owe me explanations," I said. He gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You've made a mistake. The transaction's locked, my accounts are frozen, and your lawyer is playing games. This isn't over." "You're right," I said. "It's not." He hesitated. "You think you can scare me with paperwork?" "Not scare," I said, turning one of the documents toward the light. "Teach." For a moment there was silence, a silence so deep I could hear him breathing. Then his tone hardened. "You're bluffing. You're just a bitter old woman clinging to—" "To the law?" I interrupted. "Yes, I do cling to that." He exhaled sharply, and I could almost see him pacing, running his hand through his hair, that perfect composure starting to crack. "You don't understand how this works. I can fix it. I'll talk to the bank directly." "I'd like to see you try," I said evenly. "You'll find that the bank has changed its priorities." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "that it listens to me." There was a beat of silence, then a low curse. You set this up." "No," I said, almost gently. "My husband did. I just followed the instructions." He shouted something incoherent, then stopped. I could hear the sound of glass breaking, perhaps a bottle, perhaps a mirror. Then, nothing. "You should rest, Lucas," I said softly. "You'll need a clear head for the investigation tomorrow." "What investigation?" "The one you started," I said, "by signing my name." The call went dead. I sat there, the phone still warm in my hand, the night still humming around me. The silence after his voice vanished felt enormous, like a wound finally cauterized. I placed the phone down beside a neat stack of documents, aligning the corners precisely the way Robert always did. Across the room, the clock struck midnight, steady and calm. "I didn't raise my voice," I murmured to the empty room. "I just raised the stakes." I closed the folder, the paper's weight solid beneath my fingertips. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. The waves below crashed harder against the rocks, as if echoing the sound of something breaking, not in me, but in him. By the time I turned off the lamp, the storm had begun. It would last all night, but I didn't mind. Some lessons need thunder to be heard. Thousands of miles away, under the gray Parisian sky, Lucas Reed was unraveling. The hotel suite that once looked like a victory now smelled of cold coffee and panic. Clara stood near the window, her reflection fractured by the raindrops streaking down the glass. Behind her, Lucas paced, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but sharp. "Try it again," he said. "No, I don't care about compliance or red flags. Just move the funds." The man on the other end said something, muffled by distance. Lucas's face drained of color. "What do you mean, account restricted? It's my money." He slammed the phone onto the table, sending papers fluttering. Clara flinched at the sound. "Lucas, what's happening?" He ignored her, reopening his laptop, typing furiously. The blue glow lit up his face, hollowing it. The screen blinked with a message in bold red letters. "Transfer rejected. Contact account manager." Lucas's jaw tightened. He hit refresh. The same message appeared again and again, and "Lucas, talk to me," Clara said, stepping closer. He spun toward her. "It's your mother. It has to be. She's behind this." Clara froze. "My mother? What are you talking about?" "She froze the accounts," he said. "The house sale, the trust fund, everything. She's sabotaging us." "She wouldn't—" Clara stopped, her voice breaking. "She couldn't even access those records." Lucas laughed bitterly. "Couldn't she? You have no idea who she really is, do you?" Clara's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "She owns Oceanfront Bank, Clara. The same bank that approved our loan. The same one handling the transfer. Every dollar we moved passed through her hands." "That's not possible," Clara whispered. "It's more than possible. It's done." He shoved the laptop toward her. "See for yourself." She stared at the screen, at the frozen transaction, at her name tied to it. Her pulse quickened. "Lucas, did you forge her signature?" He hesitated, just long enough for her to understand the truth. "Oh my God," she said, stepping back. "You did. You actually did." "Don't be naive," he snapped. "It's just business." "Business?" Her voice trembled. "You used me. You used her." "I used opportunity," he said coldly. "And if she'd kept out of it, we'd be rich." The air in the room turned heavy. Clara's tears came fast, silent. She looked at the man she thought she loved and saw nothing but ambition wearing a mask. Meanwhile, back in California, I sat in my study, the news channel murmuring quietly in the background. A report flashed across the screen. Financial investigation, Oceanfront Realty under scrutiny for fraudulent transactions. The anchor's voice was calm, detached, but every word landed with precision. I turned up the volume slightly, listening to the details. Lucas's name was mentioned once, briefly, then followed by the phrase, "International inquiry pending." On the table beside me lay the same contract he had forged, now stamped and sealed as evidence. The law didn't need me to chase him. It was already doing its work. I sipped my tea, still warm, and whispered to no one, "You can't outrun what's already written in ink." Back in Paris, Clara packed a small suitcase. Lucas didn't notice until she zipped it shut. "Where are you going?" "Home," she said. "To face what I should have seen sooner." He laughed, a broken sound. "Home? There is no home left." She looked at him one last time. "You're right. Not for you." When she walked out, he didn't follow. The hotel door closed softly, but to him, it sounded like judgment. Later that night, as the rain hammered against the windows, he sat alone in the dim light, staring at the lifeless laptop screen. His reflection stared back, older, meaner, and suddenly very small. Across the ocean, I turned off the television, the storm outside finally easing. The waves brushed the shore with a rhythm that felt almost merciful. Somewhere far away, everything he'd built on lies was collapsing under its own weight. Some lessons, I thought, only the fall can teach. It was past midnight when I heard the knock. 3 slow, uneven taps that sounded more like a plea than a visit. Outside, the wind dragged the last of the rain across the windows, and the ocean murmured somewhere beyond the cliffs. I stood still for a moment, listening. No one ever came to this house uninvited anymore. When I opened the door, Clara was there, drenched, shaking, her hair clinging to her face. Her suitcase sat at her feet, soaked through. For a second, neither of us spoke. The porch light cast her in a thin, pale glow that made her look like the ghost of a decision I had made years ago. "Mom," she said finally, her voice breaking on the word. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I watched her carefully. Her mascara had run, her hands trembled, and her breath came in shallow bursts. "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You never do." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, I didn't know what he was doing." "He said everything was under control, that it was good for us." I stepped aside, letting the door swing open. "Come in before you catch pneumonia," I said, and turned away. She hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. The sound of her wet shoes against the wooden floor was small, apologetic. I led her into the living room. The fireplace hadn't been lit in days, but I struck a match and set it burning. The flames caught slowly, throwing light across her face. She stood near the hearth, clutching her coat as if it were armor. "I left him," she whispered. "I assumed," I said. "He forged your signature. I didn't know until the money disappeared," I finished for her. She winced, and the silence between us stretched. Outside, the wind beat against the windows, a steady reminder of everything that had been stripped away. "I thought we were building a life," she said softly, "but I was just helping him destroy yours." I didn't respond. There are moments when silence is kinder than truth. She sank into the armchair by the fire, her wet coat dripping onto the rug. For a while, the only sound was the crackle of the flames. Then she said, "Do you hate me?" I turned to her. "No, I said. "I just stopped expecting you to protect what I gave you." Her chin trembled. "I don't deserve to be here." "Probably not," I said, and then after a pause, "But that's never stopped family before." She laughed weakly, a sound half sorrow and half disbelief. "You haven't changed." "No," I said. "I just remembered who I was." She leaned forward, her hands near the fire. "I came back because I didn't know where else to go. Everyone thinks I'm the reason he did this. Maybe I am." "Then start by not being that reason again," I said. She nodded, tears falling silently. "I'll do anything to make it right." "Don't promise," I told her. "Prove." The flames flickered higher, painting gold across the room. She looked smaller in the chair. Not the entitled daughter, not the accomplice, but a woman realizing the cost of ignorance. After a long time, I stood and said, "You can stay in the guest room. Towels are in the closet. The rest you'll figure out." "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded once and turned toward the hallway. At the door, I paused. "Clara." She looked up. "You never learned how to listen," I said. "Maybe this is how you start." Then I left her there by the fire, her shadow long and trembling against the wall. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Somewhere beneath the noise of the storm, something was shifting. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first fragile sound of it being possible. The next morning arrived gray and heavy, as if the sky itself understood what was coming. Clara barely spoke during breakfast. She sat at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from, eyes fixed on the sea through the window. There was nothing left to say between us that hadn't already been burned by silence. When Donovan called, his voice was calm, professional, the way truth always sounds when it no longer has to prove itself. "Sylvia, the documents are ready," he said. "I think it's time your daughter saw what she didn't know." I looked across the table at her. "Get your coat," I said. "We're going out." The drive to town was wordless. The windshield wipers moved in slow, steady arcs, clearing away the drizzle, but not the distance between us. Clara kept her head turned toward the ocean, watching waves crash and retreat. She looked smaller than I remembered, deflated somehow, as though her pride had finally run out of air. When we arrived, Donovan was waiting in his office. He stood as we entered, his suit immaculate, his expression a blend of empathy and duty. "Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Whitmore, please have a seat." Clara hesitated before sitting. Her eyes darted to the stack of folders on his desk. The name Oceanfront Bank was printed clearly on the top one, next to a file number she didn't recognize. Donovan opened it and slid the first page forward. "Your mother asked me to show you these records," he said gently. "They date back nearly 2 decades. As of today, Sylvia Whitmore holds the controlling shares of Oceanfront Bank. She's had that authority since before your father passed." Clara blinked, her lips parting slightly. "That's not possible. She retired years ago." I looked at her steadily. "I stepped away. I didn't vanish." Donovan continued. "Lucas Reed used this bank to process fraudulent transfers, including the attempted sale of your mother's home. All of those accounts have been suspended, pending investigation. Every transaction he touched is now under review by financial authorities in 2 countries. Clara's face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He told me everything was in order. He said it was just paperwork." Donovan folded his hands. "It was, until he decided to write his own version of the truth." Her eyes flicked toward me, wide and pleading. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? About the bank, about any of this?" I held her gaze. "Because you wouldn't have listened. You needed to learn it, not hear it." Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to speak, but the words came out cracked and small. "You saved me, even after everything I did." "No," I said. "I protected what was left of us. There's a difference." The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Donovan looked away politely, giving us space. I could see her trembling, the way her shoulders folded inward, shame reshaping her posture into humility. After a long moment, I said, "You wanted freedom. Now you have it. But it comes with responsibility. Every decision you make from now on carries a name. Mine, yours, and his. Make sure you understand the weight of that." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I do." I stood. "Good. Then start acting like it." As we left the office, Donovan walked us to the door. "Justice isn't always about punishment," he said softly. "Sometimes it's about revelation." I nodded once, and revelation hurts longer. Outside, the air was sharp and clean after the rain. The world looked washed, renewed, though not yet forgiven. Clara walked beside me, her steps slow, uneven. I didn't offer my arm. Some balances, I knew, had to be restored through effort, not comfort. When we reached the car, she turned to me. "Will you ever forgive me?" I looked out at the ocean visible in the distance, gray and endless. "Forgiveness isn't a gift," I said. "It's an education, and you've just started class." As we drove home, the sky began to clear, thin streaks of sunlight cutting through the clouds. The day was brighter, but the light didn't warm. It revealed. In the reflection of the window, I saw her, silent, remorseful, aware. For the first time in years, that was enough. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, clear, steady, unbroken by clouds. It was the first quiet morning the house had known in months. The storm had finally passed, but its traces lingered. Damp footprints on the porch, salt streaks on the windows, and the faint, restless hum of the sea below. Clara stood in the doorway, wearing one of my old sweaters, sleeves rolled up, her hair pulled back. For a moment, I almost saw her as she had been at 15, bright-eyed, determined, certain that life would always bend toward her will. Now, there was something new in her eyes, humility, maybe even purpose. She cleared her throat. "I was thinking," she said softly, "I could start cleaning the old guest room, the one with the broken blinds." "Do what you like," I replied. She nodded, waiting for something more. When it didn't come, she disappeared down the hallway. Soon, I heard the soft scrape of a broom against the floor, the creak of windows opening, the thud of boxes being moved. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. I sat by the window watching the garden. The roses I had neglected for months were still standing, stubborn as ever, their petals bruised but alive. Resilience, I thought, is quieter than people imagine. It doesn't roar, it rebuilds. Hours passed in gentle rhythm. The house slowly began to sound like a home again. The rustle of curtains, the faint hum of a vacuum, the distant sound of Clara humming an old melody she used to play on the piano. By afternoon, she came into the kitchen, dust streaking her cheeks. "I found the photo albums," she said, holding a stack of them. "They were in the attic. Some of the pages stuck together, but most are still fine." She set them on the table. The top one opened to a picture of Robert and me standing outside the mansion the year it was built. Clara was 6, perched on his shoulders, both of them laughing. The wind had caught her hair, and she looked wild with joy. "I forgot this existed," she whispered. "Most people forget the things they didn't earn," I said, but there was no bite in my tone. She smiled faintly, tracing her father's face with her fingertip. "I wish I'd listened to him more." "So do I said quietly. The kettle whistled. I poured 2 cups of tea and placed one in front of her. "If you're going to stay here, you'll contribute. No charity." She nodded. "I want to. I'll find work. Anything." "Good," I said. "Start small. Start honest." She looked up, surprised by the softness in my voice. "Thank you." I didn't answer. Gratitude was premature. Effort was still owed. Later, as evening fell, I stood in the doorway and watched her sweeping the front steps. The light caught the dust in the air, turning it golden. She paused once to stretch her back, then kept going, methodical, quiet, determined. I thought of Robert, how he used to say that rebuilding wasn't about fixing what broke. It was about teaching the cracks to hold meaning. For the first time in a long while, that meaning felt close again. I turned back inside, letting the screen door creak shut behind me. Somewhere in the distance, the tide shifted. The house breathed. The world, at last, was learning to be gentle. The phone rang just after lunch. I had been pruning the roses, their thorns catching the sleeves of my gloves. The sound startled me. Not the sharp, modern tone of a phone, but the way it seemed to break the calm that had settled over the house. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered. "Mrs. Whitmore!" Donovan's voice came through, steady but carrying the weight of news. "I thought you should hear it from me first." "What happened?" I asked. "Lucas Reed has been detained in France," he said. "Forgery, fraud, falsified international transfers, the whole list. The investigation went faster than expected. He's facing extradition to the U.S. within the week." I didn't say anything at first. The words hung in the air like the moment before a storm breaks. I looked out the window where the ocean shimmered under a clean sky. "Are you relieved?" Donovan asked gently. "Relief isn't the word," I said. "It's simply balance, restoring itself." There was a brief silence. Then he said, "You handled this beautifully, Sylvia. Quietly, efficiently. Robert would have approved. He would have reminded me not to waste satisfaction on justice," I replied. Donovan chuckled softly. "You sound like him more every year." "That was always the plan," I said, and smiled faintly. We spoke a few more minutes about technicalities, paperwork, future hearings, frozen assets, the formal language of closure. When I hung up, I stood for a while, listening to the hum of the wind through the open window. It carried the faint salt of the sea, mingled with the scent of earth and new growth. Clara appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Was that Mr. Pike?" "Yes," I said. "What did he say?" I turned toward her, letting the light fall between us like a soft curtain. "Lucas has been arrested." She froze, her breath catching. "Is he going to prison?" "Eventually," I said. "The law takes its time, but it doesn't forget." She looked down, her voice trembling. "I didn't want this for him." "Neither did I," said, "but he wrote his own ending." Clara sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "I thought justice would feel different. I thought it would feel like winning." "It never does," I said. "It just feels quiet." She nodded slowly, tears slipping through her fingers. "Do you hate him?" "No," I said after a pause. "Hate is still a kind of attachment, and I've spent enough of my life tied to people who mistook kindness for weakness." Outside, the wind shifted. The waves had calmed, rolling in slow, deliberate rhythm. For the first time in months, the horizon looked clean, as if the storm that had defined our lives had finally drifted out to sea. Clara stood and moved toward the window. "What now?" she asked. "Now," I said. "We keep living. That's the hardest part of all this, learning how to breathe when the noise stops." We stood there in silence, side by side, watching the water sparkle under the sun. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a man who had built his life on deceit was beginning to face the echo of his own choices. And for the first time in a long while, the air inside the house felt lighter. Not because the storm had passed, but because we had survived it. Evening came soft and gold, the kind of light that forgives everything it touches. The sea outside shimmered like glass, calm and endless. In the living room, the air carried the faint scent of salt and old wood polish, traces of the life we'd lived before everything broke. Clara entered quietly, holding something wrapped in a linen cloth. "I found this upstairs," she said. "It was in the attic." She unwrapped it gently. Inside lay Robert's old piano book, the one with the worn leather cover and the faded ink notes. "He used to play this every Sunday morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said. "He said it made the house feel alive." Clara set the book on the piano, brushed away a thin layer of dust, and lifted the lid. The keys were slightly yellowed, but when she pressed one, the note rang clear. It trembled in the air for a moment, uncertain, like a memory returning after too long a silence. "I haven't played in years," she said. "Then start," I told her. She hesitated, then sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys, stiff with hesitation. Slowly, she began to play, halting at first, then finding rhythm. The melody stumbled, but didn't break. It was the same song Robert had played on the night we bought this house, the night we promised to fill it with laughter and light. The sound filled the room, soft and uneven, but beautiful. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting golden shapes across the walls. I stood by the window listening. Every note felt like a confession, every pause a plea for forgiveness. Clara's voice cracked softly as she said, "Do you think he'd forgive me?" I turned toward her. "He already has," I said. "We both have." She stopped playing, her fingers resting on the keys. Tears fell quietly onto the ivory surface, leaving small, shining circles. "I didn't understand how much I hurt you. I just wanted to live differently, to feel free." "You were free," I said gently. "You just didn't know what to do with it." She nodded, unable to speak. I moved closer and rested my hand lightly on her shoulder. "Freedom means nothing without responsibility. But learning that doesn't make you weak, Clara. It makes you human." Her voice was small, trembling. "I wish I could start over." "You can," I said. "That's what forgiveness is. Not forgetting, just beginning again without pretending it never happened." For a moment we stayed like that, mother and daughter, framed by music and memory. The melody picked up again, softer, steadier. This time she played it cleanly, no missed notes, no hesitation. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole. As she played, I glanced at the framed photo on the mantel, Robert with his arm around both of us, his smile quiet, knowing. The firelight caught the edge of the glass, making it gleam, voice barely above a whisper. "Forgiveness isn't a door we open for others," I said. "It's a window we open for ourselves." Clara looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "Does it ever close?" "Only when we forget to breathe," I said. The song came to its final note, long, soft, lingering in the stillness like a benediction. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Clara exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for years. The last light of day slid across the floor, golden and fleeting. I reached out and closed the piano lid gently. The echo of that final note seemed to stay in the air, like the memory of a storm that had passed and left the world cleaner than before. The following weeks passed quietly. The house found a new rhythm, the kind of peace that comes not from forgetting, but from learning how to live with the noise of memory. Each morning, I woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of movement downstairs. Clara was no longer sleeping in. One morning, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of printed forms and a worn leather notebook. Her hair was tied back, her sleeves rolled, a pencil tucked behind one ear. "What's all this?" I asked. "Job applications," she said. "There's an opening at the small oceanfront branch downtown, administrative assistant. Nothing fancy, but it's work." I poured my coffee slowly. "Work is never small," I said. "Only the ego that measures it is." She smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd say that." She spent the next few days preparing, ironing her blouse, practicing interview answers, printing resumes. It was almost endearing, the way she fussed over every detail. On the morning of the interview, she stood at the front door, nervous and determined. "How do I look?" she asked. "Like someone finally worth hiring," I said. She laughed softly, kissed my cheek, and left. I watched her through the window as she walked down the driveway, head high, steps steady. For the first time, she didn't look like she was running away from her life. She looked like she was walking toward it. The house was quiet after she left. I sat by the window, gazing at the garden as the sun climbed higher. The roses had begun to bloom again, stubbornly bright against the salt air. It struck me that survival wasn't loud or glorious. It was patient, repetitive, and humbling. That afternoon, Clara returned. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with a nervous kind of hope. She held a folded sheet of paper in her hand. "Well?" I asked. "I got it," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "It's just part-time for now, but they said I can learn the financial systems and maybe move up later." I nodded slowly. "That's how it works. You earn your way up, one honest day at a time." She grinned, a light that looked younger and truer than any I'd seen in years. "I start Monday." The next morning she was up before dawn. She brewed her own coffee, packed a sandwich, and slipped out quietly so as not to wake me. But I was already awake, watching from the window as she caught the early bus into town, the same bus I once took when Robert and I were building everything from scratch. I watched her disappear into the horizon, a small figure swallowed by the day, and for a moment, pride filled the space that disappointment had occupied for too long. When she came home that evening, she smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and exhaustion, the scent of honest work. She sat at the kitchen table, pulled off her shoes, and sighed deeply. "It's strange," she said. "I've never felt this tired and this proud at the same time." "That's how you know it's real," I said. She smiled, resting her head on her arms. "You were right, Mom. Wealth isn't what you keep. It's what you can rebuild." I reached over and brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead. "True wealth," I said, "is knowing you can build again." Outside, the sun dipped below the ocean, leaving a trail of gold that faded into calm darkness. The waves rolled steady against the shore. No storms, no shouting, just the quiet rhythm of work, of time, of redemption. It was early morning when Clara suggested we visit the old mansion by the sea. 6 months had passed since the storm of betrayal had ended, and the house had been standing empty, waiting like an unopened letter. We drove in silence along the coastal road, the same one Robert and I had taken countless times before. The air smelled of salt and beginnings. When we arrived, the gate creaked as I pushed it open. Wildflowers had begun to grow between the stones, and the paint on the fence had faded from bright white to the color of sand. Yet the house itself stood proudly, weathered but not broken. Clara stepped forward first. "It looks the same," she said softly, her voice trembling. "It does," I replied. "The sea forgives faster than people." The front door gave a familiar groan as we stepped inside. Dust swirled in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Every corner whispered of the past, the scent of cedar, the echo of piano notes, the faint memory of laughter long gone. Clara ran her fingers along the wooden banister, tracing invisible lines of childhood. "I used to hide right here," she said, pointing at the curve of the staircase. "Dad would pretend not to see me." I smiled. "He always saw you. He just wanted you to think you were clever." She laughed, and the sound was pure, unguarded, unburdened. It filled the empty rooms like a forgotten melody. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt to hear laughter in this house. We spent the morning cleaning. Clara opened the windows wide, letting the sea breeze rush in. I dusted the shelves and wiped the picture frames. The portrait of Robert still hung above the fireplace, his calm eyes watching us both, as if measuring the distance between who we were and who we had become. At noon, sunlight poured into the living room, and Clara set the table for two. We ate simple food, bread, soup, and fruit, the kind of meal we once shared before everything became complicated. After lunch, she stood by the window, looking out at the vast blue horizon. "You know," she said slowly, "this house feels different now. It's not just ours anymore. It feels like it's meant for something bigger." I turned to her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then looked at me with that same earnest spark I once saw when she was little. "I remember what you told me, about how Dad wanted this place to help others, a shelter by the sea, right?" "Yes," I said, my voice quiet. He dreamed of turning it into a refuge for women starting over, a place where they could find peace and learn again. "Then let's make it happen, Mom," Clara said. "We have the space, we have the means, and I finally understand why it matters." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had carried Robert's unfinished dream like an unspoken vow. To hear it come from her felt like the circle had closed. I walked to the window beside her. The sea shimmered, calm and infinite. "Then we'll rebuild it together," I said. Not as a monument to what was lost, but as proof that forgiveness can build something new. We spent the rest of the day sorting through old furniture and boxes. Clara found Robert's sketches for the Haven, a simple logo of a lighthouse beside a wave. She traced it gently with her fingertip. "He really planned it," she whispered. "He did," I said. "And now it's our turn." By late afternoon, the rooms were filled with sunlight again. We opened every door, letting the air circulate freely, as though the house itself was taking a deep breath. The light from the windows stretched across the floorboards, painting everything in gold. Clara turned toward me. "You know," she said, smiling, "I think Dad would be proud of us." I looked at her, truly looked, and saw not the frightened daughter who once ran away, but a woman who had rebuilt herself through truth, humility, and work. "He already is," I said. We stepped outside as the sun began to sink behind the horizon. The waves rolled in steady rhythm, gentle and eternal. The mansion stood behind us, strong and renewed, facing the sea like it had been waiting for this moment all along. Clara reached for my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" I asked. "For not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." I squeezed her hand gently. "That's what mothers do. We wait for the tide to change." As the wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and memory, I felt something lift from my chest, the last weight of bitterness dissolving into the ocean air. We stood there in silence, two silhouettes framed against the fading sun, the waves whispering their endless song of forgiveness. 6 months later, the mansion no longer felt like a relic of grief. Its walls were freshly painted a soft cream, the garden alive again with rosemary, jasmine, and roses that climbed the railings as if reclaiming their home. The sign by the front gate read, "The Haven, a shelter by the sea." Every time the wind came off the waves, it carried with it the scent of salt and second chances. I stood by the window of my study, watching a small group of women walk up the path. Some held children, others carried only small suitcases and heavy eyes. Clara greeted them at the door, her posture calm and steady, her voice full of warmth. She had become the woman I had once prayed she would be, kind, capable, and aware of what true wealth meant. One of the younger women hesitated at the threshold. Clara smiled and reached out her hand. "You're safe here," she said softly. The woman nodded, stepping inside as the morning light flooded over both of them. I turned back to my desk. There, on the polished surface, lay a half-written letter, addressed to Robert. The ink was dark, deliberate, each word chosen as carefully as a signature on a life. To Robert, "We did it. Justice didn't end in revenge, it ended in love. The house you built to shelter our memories now shelters others. The sea still sings outside the window, but it sounds softer now, like gratitude." I set the pen down and watched the ink dry slowly, thinking about how every act of justice had once been born from quiet understanding. Robert always said that dignity was wealth you could never lose, and now, watching Clara carry that truth forward, I finally believed him. Outside, the day shimmered with life. Workers repaired the old boathouse, and laughter floated across the courtyard. In the kitchen, I could hear the sound of dishes, the rhythm of belonging. The house that had once echoed with silence was now filled with voices, not loud, but alive. Clara appeared in this doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "We just finished registering 3 new residents," she said. "One of them used to be a teacher. She wants to help with accounting classes for the women who stay here." I smiled. "That's perfect. Knowledge is the first form of freedom." Clara nodded. "You taught me that." I didn't reply. Instead, I looked past her, to the sea stretching endlessly beyond the windows. It glimmered gold under the afternoon sun, its waves slow and deliberate, as if breathing. Clara followed my gaze. "It's strange," she said quietly. "Every time I look at the water now, I don't see what we lost. I see what we rebuilt." "That's what forgiveness does," I answered. It changes what the light falls on. We walked together down the hall, past framed photographs. Robert's old plans for the bank, our wedding picture, a group photo of the first women who stayed at the Haven. Every image was a reminder that legacy wasn't measured by the money you left, but by the people you lifted. When we reached the porch, the sun had begun to set. The sky turned from gold to amber, then to a deep violet that made the sea shimmer like glass. The mansion's lights came on one by one, soft and golden, casting reflections across the water. Clara leaned against the railing. "You ever think Dad can see this?" I laughed softly. "If he can't, then the sea's doing a fine job telling him." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "You know, I used to think revenge was about winning. And now? Now I think it's about ending what shouldn't continue, so something better can start." Her words carried the calm certainty of someone who had learned through pain and grace alike. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, just as I had done when she was a little girl. As the first evening stars appeared, the lighthouse in the distance flickered to life. Its beam swept across the ocean, slow, rhythmic, eternal. It landed briefly on the mansion, lighting up the windows before drifting back to the dark horizon. "That's your father's light," I said softly. "He built it to guide sailors home. I suppose it's still doing its job." Clara rested her head on my shoulder. "And what about yours?" "My light?" I smiled. "It's here, in this house, in you." We stood like that, quiet and still, while the sound of waves folded over the rocks below. The air was cool, the kind that tastes of salt and rebirth. I thought of everything that had led us here, the deceit, the frozen accounts, the courtroom silence, the phone call that began it all. None of it mattered now. What remained was balance, the kind that doesn't need victory to feel complete. Inside, a lamp flickered on beside my unfinished letter, casting a warm glow through the window. From where we stood, the light looked like a beacon, steady and alive against the dusk. In the distance, the sea rolled on, whispering softly against the shore. "Revenge is a tide," I whispered. "It takes, it gives, it cleanses. In the end, what remains isn't salt, it's clarity." The wind caught the edges of my scarf, lifting it gently like a final breath. And in that moment, as the light from the window met the reflection of the sea, I knew this was the true ending, not destruction, but renewal. The house, the ocean, the light, all part of one long forgiveness.